zones. Yes.
And they've got them set up all across, the idea is to set them up all across the nation.
That's correct. And for anybody that got brilliant ideas, it could be institutions of higher education, institutions of religions, nonprofit organizations that might be able to develop ideas about how to solve that problem. And if they're a good one and they're working and can do evaluations to show that they're effective, they said they should be funded and to help people. And both of us are professors, and all of us, we can probably look back on and have that student that would not have gone into engineering but was in Head Start. Someone saw that talent, they nourished it. He probably went back to the community without parents that had ever had that educational experience. But that program was very intervening in that person's life. Finished Tennessee State University, now they're prospering and doing very well as a good citizen of the United States.
And that's all over, that's in general, not only
right.
African American, Hispanics, majority groups, and all of these groups have been able to succeed because of the government being willing to take a chance on them in a real sense. Is that what we're saying?
That is exactly what we're saying.
It's cost effective. I mean,
it's very
it cuts down on the incarceration and all of those things that are generally. So I know you're going to talk about that, but it also cuts down on the incarceration and all of those other things that we're spending money on. But if we were willing to put money into these promise zones, that it would, in a real sense, serve as the war on poverty helped many of us back in an earlier period.
That's right.
And of course, we're going to take this first commercial break, and we'll be back with our audience following this very, very short commercial break. Thank you and welcome back to the final segment of the show for today. We're talking to Dr. E. KSanford from Tennessee State University, a sociologist who has given us considerable information in reference to some of the challenges faced by young African American youth. Not in a real sense, Dr. Sanford, limited to African American youth. I think we've made that clear that some of the same challenges that are faced by African American youth are simply faced by youth in general who are not well off in the United States of America today. And so let's sort of pick up where we left off.
Okay, absolutely. And I think very strong, it need to be made perfectly clear that when we're thinking about the 50 years ago when Lyndon B. Johnson had the war on poverty, all of those issues were concerned about the majority group in America. Welfare should be understood without any question was developed for the majority group, meaning European Americans here in America. And many times stereotypes have a tendency to emerge in thinking that when we're thinking about CORE or Head Start or any other type of program that might help impoverished people, media sometimes will go into a low-income, impoverished area, find an African American mother that got 10, 12 children, got another one on the way, and think that they want to then have another one so they can get some set aside money. But that is just not the case. In the real sense, these programs were set up for the majority group, but there is still, as we said at the very outset, a disproportionate amount of minority groups, African Americans in particular, that are disproportionate in reference to the percentages, and therefore it's in need. And when we can have these types of programs within the communities, it can be a positive. When we think economically, as we talked in the last segment about cost benefit, the amount of cost that may be given, you have a larger benefit from it in our community and helping out versus people end up in prison where you're having to spend a tremendous amount, maybe $30,000, $35,000, $40,000 per inmate every year that they're in there. So we can put it in the positive way on the front end. We can certainly have good outcomes of African American youth and other people throughout the United States. Because one of the analysis that has been done, even during the time of Lyndon Bird Johnson, you can go back to that same area that was so impoverished then, and if you come today and go back to that same area and talk to a person, if they did not have a program, they will be in the same situation that they were during that earlier time of the war on poverty. So I want to state that as an issue, as a problem that we still have here in America, in the richest nation in the world. And so we definitely need those types of programs to help African American youth. It is indeed disproportionate in that area as well as other youth. And that's why you see these promise zones that President Obama, who's sensitive to these, saying that if a family or a child want to try to progress and do well, that they should have that opportunity to. And that's what these particular helping aids would do for youth in America.
You know, Dr. Sanford, one of the things that we've always been concerned with is political participation. And I think that in a real sense, there have been many efforts in order to diminish African, minority political participation in this country. But what are some of the things that you would say in reference, since we're coming up to Dr. King's holiday and that kind of information, what would you say in reference to young people, especially understanding the importance of political participation, and how would you encourage them to become involved in the political process, regardless of what party or what group that they wish to participate with, that as long as they understand that it's important in terms of their own lives and participating in politics. Speak to that for during the next few minutes.
And this is a very important question that you raised, because all of this generated, as we start off by talking about the government help. And so here you are with younger people that make up a significant portion of our population that need to be a part of that process. Education, I think, is that key to that. One has to be very well aware and educated as to the social ills of the past and how they unfolded to the present, so that they will have this at least intellectual idea about why there is a need to have certain things today. That's why you have some of the right-wing conservative, Rush Limbaugh and many others that can say things and people feel that they are correct in their assessment because they are unaware of the history. That's why I laid out that paradigm earlier of hundreds of years of enslavement that led through Jim Crow, and Michelle Alexander has a book, who's a lawyer, entitled The New Jim Crow, that is existing right now. So when people are aware of that history, then they can understand why there is a need to do it today. And you have a lot of problems going on in the politics and voting now. People trying to redirect certain zones within certain districts so that when people do go out to vote, they know they will lose the percentage of their vote and they will not win that particular precinct. And so younger people need to be aware of this and need to be conscious. And I think through our educational process, and I would hope within the African American community, since it's on African American youth, our churches will become rejuvenated and understand some of the issues that you're bringing up on your program, like we're talking about today, and be encouraging for their youth. And then from there, they be very active. I think education is at the key.
And it's important for them to register in order to become involved in politics and to understand that without a vote, that they really have no voice. And the greater their voting participation, the greater what their voice in a real sense. Would you agree with that as a proposition?
Absolutely, I agree with that 100%. And I would also like to make one other quick observation that's really linked to poverty and economics and everything, and that is education and how parents need to be very much involved in the educational process of their children. We're at a brink now in our country where many are stating that, well, it's that teacher. Well, what happens at home is very important. So given the programs, you have to be very active in it, but just because you have a computer, and that's not going to make a child learn. You have to spend time with them in that whole learning process. And I hope, given what we are talking about today within African American youth and poverty, we still need that engagement. And many people have been very successful that have lived in poverty, worse than we even know it today, that have come out and been very successful and we just worked hard. But you have to go over something over and over again. parents have to reinforce learning, and if they are doing that, I think we can have some very good outcomes. But that said, there is still a very strong need for programs to help people, because that poverty-stricken situation that you're in brings about and causes a lot of different ills within the society in which we live in. And disproportionate African-American youth are involved in that.
And so overall, Dr. Sanford, how would you calculate the future for minorities in this country? I know we've come a long way in terms of slavery and et cetera, and et cetera. But are you optimistic or rather pessimistic in reference to the possibilities of minorities in this country today?
Well, I like to be very optimistic and say if we can get conscious and learn and do our very best, and if we have a president like we have with President Obama that understand the needs for all, and thinking that if those programs can help, that they should, that everyone should have a chance to do it. Equality should be very present there. We have to think in terms of trying to continue to understand and to work on racism and sexism that exists within our society, so opportunities can open up in a fair way. So I am the optimist of that, but we also understand in this cost-benefit analysis of America that the middle class is becoming not as large as it used to be. It's becoming smaller. You're having more at the top that are the very wealthy, less of those that are in the middle class. That brings a larger part of those that are in poverty. And that's where we are right now within this society. And it makes it even much more complex than 50 years ago as we're closing with the Lyndon-Johnson's war on poverty. Because we're living in a telecommunication society, people will have to have multiple skill sets in order to survive. And if you're not educated, then you won't have it. During that earlier time period, during a service society, moving into a technological age, people had opportunities that were there. Everything has become very narrow to move into that middle class. So skill sets are going to be very important. So there are going to be these needs to help reach out and to help people. If not, they will find a way to do it, and it'll be in crime and delinquency.
Dr. Sanford, let me tell you how delighted we are to have had an opportunity to talk about some of these issues with you today, because I know that you've been committed, and that's one reason we like to have you on, because you are committed and you have a real understanding and a lot of good, excellent information that all of our audience, not only the minorities, but all of our audience can profit from, because we know that this is the United States of America, and no matter how bad the situation is today, it was not as bad as where we started from. And so I think that as long as we keep that, and I think you've indicated that, as long as we keep that in mind, then there's nothing that can keep any of us back, any minority group, regardless. And so I want to thank you for giving us that information. And let me encourage our audience to tune in again next week for another informative edition of Comments. Thank you and good morning.